I have the privilege of moderating the last panel of the Mexico Mining Forum, and a very exciting one at that. We have today on our panel experts that deal with ESG and company representatives that represent mining companies operating in Mexico that are at the vanguard of the efforts to meet with ESG compliance. The panel for today is called ESG, Creating Positive Impact for Communities and the Environment. The way that we will conduct this panel will be by I will be asking questions to our participants, and our participants will have 2 minutes to respond. I would like to introduce again YUREN Castillo. He is the Earth and Environmental Manager for Mexico at Golder WSP. Bradford Cook, Founder and Executive Chairman of Endeavor Silver. Melissa Sanderson, Founder of ESG Plus and Mel Sanderson Consulting. Cristina Rodriguez, Subdirector of Sustainability at Minera Cuscatlán. ULISES NERI, Vice Chair of Mexico, and he is part of the expert group on resource management. Thank you all for being with us today. And because I know that there is a lot of interest on this issue, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. I would like to begin with a broad question. And I would like to ask our panelists, what are the future environmental and social challenges that mining companies will face? And how can mining companies better prepare for them? We have seen ESG initiatives within different stock exchanges around the world. We have seen European legislation moving along with ESG issues. And we have seen ESG efforts here in Mexico as well. How is it that we can better prepare as companies that are operating in Mexico? I don't know who would like to begin.
I think that one of the big environmental challenges is climate change. It affects every aspect of what mines are trying to do, from exacerbating water issues to also exacerbating things like dust pollution that are very troubling for the communities, particularly surrounding the mine sites. So trying to figure out, given where your mine is located, what your climate change plan is a key challenge that I see for mining companies moving forward in the environmental domain. And on the social side, the fact is not to downplay the importance of legislation and investor attention. But for me, the reality is that companies need to change their thinking fundamentally on how they regard social license and the interactions that lead up to it. Because in the past, companies have negotiated to achieve a win. I think that in the future, companies and social groups need to be negotiating to achieve a compromise, because neither side is going to achieve a win. The world is very polarized. Expectations of communities have changed. People are much more empowered, and the world is a smaller place with a lot more expertise available to social groups that previously might have been considered marginalized. And in that dynamic, I think if you can negotiate to a compromise, that's your win.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Would anybody else like to chime in? Cristina?
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for letting me be here sharing this amazing panel with all of you. Well, I also believe that one of our main challenges is climate change. And this is because one of the main things that we need to put our sight in is in our short, medium, and long-term goals related to the innovation of technology in our operations, to reduce our footprints and to reduce our environmental impacts in other areas. I believe that we in Minera Cuscatlán have been working in three main areas. One is water. We have been working very, very tightly with technology, with a close cycle of water management to reduce our impact, our environmental impact. We also work with tailings management to make them safe and not becoming a harm to or a hazard to health to the communities or to the workers here. We use a dry stack technology, and we also take care of water with this. And the other one is energy. And last year we implemented a new project with clean energy with solar panels. And it's something that we are working to make progress and to keep incentivizing in the future.
Thank you very much, Cristina, for those examples of what you have been implementing at Minera Cuscatlán. YUREN, Bradford, ULISES, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Anna. I'm gonna take the lead here. And yes, I agree with Melissa and Cristina that climate change is problematic that mining sector should attend on as an urgent matter. And obviously, there are a lot of challenges related to climate change. There is a lot of uncertainty, especially because of local regulations are still under development, and most of the companies doesn't know what's next. And this is very important to understand. That is something that we as an industry should take the lead on taking the examples from other countries or frameworks already established on the industry to know what's the next steps. And I'm going to add another line additionally to climate change and energy that obviously is very important and it's very close connected to climate change. And I'm going to add that one of the challenges that we are seeing right now on the industry, and it will be in the medium and short term, is that a lot of mining companies here in Mexico are close to the end of their mine life. And also the regulation is another matter here in mine closure. So a lot of our clients are concerned on the matter that they are coming close to the closure and they don't know what are the next steps. So this is very important because this uncertainty, and if it's not well managed, can cause a lot of problems in the future if a closure plan is not well managed at this point for the mine sites. So yeah, I encourage everyone to take the lead and use existing existing frameworks to use an example for what to do on the next steps.
Thank you very much, Yuren. Bradford?
Yes. Things like climate change and social activism are external forces, external challenges. And if you let them drive the agenda, then you'll not constantly be in a reaction mode. At Endeavor Silver, we've always felt that the first principle to dealing with environmental and social impacts is internal. And it's based on our own integrity as people and as a company. So I would point first to that as being the most important principle in preparing for social and environmental challenges, because then we set the agenda by being proactive in protecting the environment, reclaiming the environment, proactive in developing relationships, enhancing relationships with communities.
Thank you very much. Ulises.
Yes, thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for the invitation, the organizers. In the future, the social and environmental challenges is very important, taking into consideration how the companies, the mining companies, can achieve the balance between their expectation of the shareholders with the expectation of the stakeholders, with the people, the community, the government, the local government, federal government. They are analyzing around all the mining projects. Analyze in an holistic view all of these technical, economical, social, environmental, and regulatory aspects in the same framework, in the same page, using qualitative and quantitative tools will be very important in order to identify which priorities is necessary to address with some specific issues, beyond only to some solution related to change or to face the climate change. Also, one of the aspects are important in the community, the projects, in order to address properly the different challenges that the community already has. In this perspective, in United Nations, we have some tools like United Nations Framework Classification. When the resources and reserves are evaluated, taking into consideration technical, social, and environmental challenges. One other standard, like the United Nations Resources Management System, that's another tool and a standard where together we can analyze the different aspects that a company face in these aspects. The objective, in specific for United Nations, is analyze the 17 development goals, the SDGs, in order to prioritize which activities is more important, or when to prioritize what's important, or which activities it could be possible to develop in the first stage. Thank you.
That's very interesting. If I could just summarize, basically what I'm seeing is a lot of coincidences between these answers. So we have internal and we have external factors that are contributing basically to the way that companies need to, I would say, up their game with regard to risk management, making it systematic and understanding that both the internal and the external factors, like Melissa said, which I thought was quite interesting, require a compromise, perhaps no longer a win. I'm going to go ahead and get to the second question of our panel. And I would like to ask you about specific ESG issues, and especially those that are important for Mexico. In a particularly water scarce country like Mexico, especially in our northern states, what new practices, including management of tailings, have allowed mining companies to better manage their water resources? What are some of the trends that you are seeing with regard to water management in Mexico?
I think the most important water impact is at the back end of our process, that is the tailings facilities. Most tailings facilities historically have been what we call wet facilities, where the ground up rock after the minerals have been extracted from it are typically stored as a clay underwater behind a dam. And two existing mines were both of those types of historic facilities. We did actually convert in the 2008-2009 period our Guanaceví mine to filtered dry stack tailings, which allows us to recycle the water. Now, obviously, there's a greater cost both to build and to operate these facilities, but the huge benefit is that the amount of water requirement is dramatically reduced. We're currently recycling 90% of our water at Guanaceví. So I think that's the biggest possible impact on water management.
Maybe ULISES, YUREN, Melissa, talk about some of the best management practices that we're seeing with regard to water management.
Sure. So yeah, absolutely, and what your comment is very appropriate. What I'm about to say is that the mining industry has realized that the use of water in a socially equitable, environmental, sustainable, and economical beneficial manner is the only approach to support the sustainable mining. And this approach is often called as a water stewardship. And although water stewardship is not a new practice in the industry, over the last years have been demonstrated that it's very effective because of the inclusion of the stakeholders and obviously the well-being of the environment. So this approach required that mining companies transition from simple water management to a stewardship by itself. And those require fundamental change on the way that companies view and manage water as a shared resource, and to understand that this action should be implemented not only within the mining facility or on the operational context, but should consider the needs of priorities, requirements also of all other identified water users or stakeholders. And obviously, as I mentioned previously, it should consider the healthy functioning of the local ecosystems. And I think what makes this approach very effective is the fact that it encourages dialogue, conversation with stakeholders, and to come together and discuss, identify, and obviously prioritize issues and build partnerships to action decision-making, considering the short-term and long-term for all the parts involved in this case.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yuren. Melissa, ULISES, maybe something along those lines as well?
Yes, exactly. Related with the water, it's very important also to take into consideration the stage of the projects, about the location of the projects, in order to identify what is the resources that are in place, in order to analyze what is the priorities also for the communities, for the stakeholders in the place. But also take into consideration the role of the technology. What kind of technology is possible to use to reduce the water, or use another kind of the products or the activities in order to replace some amount of the water. For instance, I come from the oil and gas industry, where the fracking activities, the hydraulic activities, is an issue related with the social and environmental aspects. However, now there are technologies where the water inside, or the specific water in the ground, is possible to use, not exactly water to use in the human activities, but also water in some reservoirs at a certain level in the ground that is possible to use for the industrial activities. But also the technologies that replace the water for another kind of the technologies to use in the specific aspects. Technology is a key issue when you are analyzing the water, but also analyzing the priorities and necessities from the stakeholders in place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to follow up on that technology point, because again, depending on what material you're mining, obviously, because there's a great variation across the industry between copper mining at one end and rare earths at the other. But given that preliminary statement, there's a lot of emerging technologies for processing that are greatly reducing water demands for different products. There are new mining techniques rather than open pit that are also decreasing water usage. You look at things I mentioned, dust earlier. A lot of companies have moved away from spraying water as a dust reduction and control measure, because in our current circumstances, that's a pure waste of water. And new chemical agents are being used instead, earth-friendly chemical agents, let me stress that are bio-based. And a lot of the mines, particularly the open pit areas, are now putting in place measures by which to capture rainwater and flow that into reservoirs where they can use it to recycle on the mining site for the various uses. So there's a lot of exciting things happening in that domain of water stewardship, and particularly utilizing technology, as ULISES mentioned.
Thank you. And perhaps, Christina, just like Bradford did, you could provide us with some of those examples?
Sure. And I think when we're talking about sustainability in the mining industry, one of the first steps regarding water management is to make sure that you assess that your needs of water do not compete with the needs of water from the community or the communities that are around your installation. So in that sense, we in Cuscatlán, we have water for our process from two main sources. The first one is the rain, as you said, Melissa. We capture the rain and we use it for a small part of our process. But the big part comes from the water treatment plant from Ocotlan. It's a town nearby, really close. And well, before Compañía Minera Cuscatlán, they had their water treatment plant, but it didn't have any maintenance. So the water entered dirty and came out dirty to the river. That led to agricultural areas. So we invest on that plant, and now we use that water for our plant, for a process plant, and we recycle continuously, and it covers around 90% of our water needs in Cuscatlán.
Thank you very much, Christina.
Ana, if you don't mind, what Christina just said is really important, because the mining industry does a terrible job of publicizing the good things that it does. And, you know, for instance, I know of a company that built a desalination plant and a huge pipeline and brought potable water into the mountains near the concession and built a sewage treatment plant to ensure that the city would continuously have access to that clean water that was coming in. So often mining companies are doing those sorts of things. And aside from the immediate communities, nobody knows. We need to do a lot better tooting our own horn and talking about the good that we do, and, you know, maybe deflect some negative perceptions in that way.
I think that there is an issue here of understanding impacts. And one of the things that, you know, having worked in different extractive industries myself, I think that, you know, I'm just going to have to chime in with what Melissa said. Yes, we are very good, I think, in the mining industry of understanding on our impacts. And when we have the foresight to invest in these long-term solutions, obviously, then we have the capability of minimizing a slew of risks that, to some degree, I think Bradford talked about in his first comment with, you know, with the prowess that we have within our internal teams. It's always amazing for me when I see teams that develop projects in a collaborative manner and include all of these different impacts in their initial analysis. I'm going to just go ahead and get to the next question. How are companies, in your point of view, implementing greener alternatives? And what is their impact on operations? And I would like, if maybe some of our panelists have the expertise, and I know that you do, to talk about greener alternatives in the context of Mexico.
Greener alternatives is beyond not only to implement some kind of technologies to reduce the emissions. For instance, it's very important, you know, in mining operations, develop projects with solar panels, wind, or replace diesel or oil fuel for natural gas or another kind of the fuels or the energy. However, beyond that, it's also important to take into consideration another activities that set or promotes sustainability activities. For instance, in the question before related with the water, but also activities related with the local content, gender equality, and also education, and other activities that all together is to set these sustainable activities that combine with the greener activities. Greener activities sometimes more focused in these renewables or reduce emissions. But now it's greener together with sustainability. And sustainability is a word with more another scope related with the activities as possible to develop altogether.
Again, when we talk about greener activities, we also need to assess our behavior. What are we doing? How are we impacting currently to the environment? We need to measure our water quality. We need to measure our emissions to the atmosphere, our greenhouse gases, and with that information to make strategies to have a real plan to diminish our impact through green technologies and greener activities. So, for example, I mentioned before, we have our solar panels, but I can talk about the impact that have that technology in our unit because we measure. So we measure about how 72 panels that provides 30 kilowatts per hour, they help us to reduce over 100 tons of CO2, for example, from our labor. But also we know that we have a really big impact on energy with our ventilation system. So now we're working to find how we can improve that process. And it's one of our goals for this year to improve that process and to reduce our footprint and to keep implementing greener technologies as the dry stack, as I mentioned also before, and to create certainty to the communities around. Melissa said before, communicate, right? So we want to communicate broader to give certainty to the people around us, and so they know our environmental compromise is real and is moving forward.
Yes, talking about energy in mining is one of the most important topics for mining companies, obviously, because energy represents one of the highest operational costs during mining. So, for example, the hauling of the ore from the pit to the mill, the processing. So it involves the consumption of high amounts of energy. And the demand of fuel, if we continue with the operation as up to date, I think that the demand for fuel will rise over the next coming years because deposits are deeper, and also they have lower quality ore. So that will require a greater processing. So in this behalf, mining companies, I think that they are orientating their effort to install green energy sources, such as hydroelectric, photovoltaic, eolic, or whatever, to minimize those operational costs. And this will probably cause that diesel use, which is the main fuel at the mine site, may experience a reduction on demand on a midterm, but I think that it will remain as a key energy source because it's very cost effective, and on that behalf, it is important that I think that the approach that all mining companies should consider is that is adopt an approach that doing more work with less fuel and more green energies. There will be a lot of benefits for the environment, sure, but also on their operational costs. So yes, energy is absolutely a very interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah, following up immediately on that transportation thing, there's another element that a lot of companies are already adapting, and that is the use of electric vehicles. Whether it's for the pickup trucks on site, whether it's for the transport trucks, a lot of companies are shifting to EVs. And of course, that goes right to UREN's point about reducing the usage of diesel, which is a comparatively dirty energy source. So I think that's one thing. Another thing that we're seeing, not just in the mining industry, but generally in economies, is the effort to shorten supply chains. And, bringing your suppliers closer has a couple of wonderful effects. It can help improve your community relations, because now you are fertilizing local businesses and encouraging local entrepreneurship. But you're also saving money, you're saving energy costs, you're saving the planet. I mean, if you want a multi-win solution, doing more with local suppliers is definitely a way to go. And on the processing side, I mentioned before, and again, this is dependent on the product, but for certain kinds of mining products, mining companies are partnering and investing heavily with universities and even government laboratories, working urgently to develop bioprocessing mechanisms. And that will get us out of a lot of the dirty side of processing and make the industry as a whole a greener, more earth-friendly industry.
I agree that electrification is clearly the theme here, moving away from hydrocarbon energy sources. At our proposed new mine site in Jalisco, Mexico, we scoured the planet looking for ideas on how to move away from either bunker fuel, grid power, or our own diesel plant. And what we landed on was actually liquefied gas, LNG, because there are established suppliers in Mexico, and they offer turnkey services to not only build but also operate those plants. We took that and encompassed it in our feasibility study, but we oversized it because the current power grid to the local towns near Terranera, it browns out every day. It's just overused and underserviced. So we have rated our power system for about 30% excess power so that we can service the local towns.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bradford. And I think here, one of the really interesting points that all of you have made is that, you know, sometimes when we talk about ESG and ESG issues and, you know, the banking and the financial institution requirements and so forth, there seems to be a tendency to consider ESG as something external or different from the business model, and it's really not. And I think that in mining specifically, as opposed to other industries, we have a history of understanding that, you know, what others now call ESG is basically what we've called robust risk management systems, with you know, with savvy business sense that can and should in the long term. And I think this is something that to keep in mind, that should in the long term for mining companies even reduce their operating costs. So I think you've all pointed to that. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and continue with our next question, and we're going to move away a little bit from the environmental and the technical and move into the social. And what I'd like to ask is your opinion on the best way to approach communities and examples of how you believe companies ensure that there is a social license to operate, that communities accept projects.
A very interesting question. With the communities, the community not only the local community where the mining or the project mining is in place, but also all the states, the area, even some parts of the country. But first is highlighting the importance of the mining activities in daily life, in all the activities now we are involved, with to highlight the importance of the minerals in many of the activities, on the many of the materials, or the things that we are using in the daily life. Second is also to try to communicate properly all the impacts, but also the benefits that represents this kind of the activity, not only in the local economy, also in the as country in terms of the activities and all the benefits, but also trying to coordinate with them, with the communities, issues related with the participation of them, not exactly in the mining projects, some of them is possible to do that, but also creating value chains or local activities, economic activities, Melissa said before in the previous question, how in this kind of activities we can promote to develop local economies or local and sustainable projects additionally to the mining activities, the mining projects, in order to combine together with mining activity in another kind of the projects with the community.
If I can jump in there, I think that the very first thing that you said, Ulysses, is extremely important because, you know, up until fairly recently, the definition of social license has centered on those surrounding communities. But, you know, thanks to a variety of social changes, including, you know, Twitter and all of our other social media platforms, there's an expectation by people who live in the capital city, live on the other side of the country. There's an expectation and an understanding that the resources being worked are national resources, not local resources. And therefore, there are increasingly questions about essentially what's in it for me living here in the capital or living on the other side of the country. And the standard answers of, well, you know, we pay our taxes and that provides you services and therefore we've contributed to your well-being are increasingly less satisfactory for the larger societies. And that leaves companies with a real dilemma because, you know, as Bradford and UREN have remarked earlier, you have your shareholders to think about. And your shareholders are sharply focused on return historically. But you know what? Shareholders are starting to change too. I guess Exxon is the most famous recent example of activist investors really saying, you know what, your social policies are not acceptable and they need to change. because just as national populations are becoming more, let us say, enlightened, so too are shareholders. So companies are getting whipsawed effectively between these two communities who have, in a very odd way, come together around the need for mining companies to think inclusively of the benefits that they can offer. And at least from the United States perspective, the complicating factor there is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Because once you start receiving requests, like let's say the Prime Minister says, why can't you build a soccer stadium in that city over there? Well, yeah, okay. You're the Prime Minister, and if we build that soccer stadium, does it actually give the perception that we're doing it to get on your good side politically so that you won't change the mining law? I mean, these are legitimate concerns as well as the cost ones that mining companies face in this changing environment. But the other thing is a lot more listening and a lot more patience is required. Because again, speaking of the past, the paradigm frequently has been to get in, dispense with talking to the natives as quickly as possible, preferably do it through a government representative and not have to deal with them directly at all, and then say, okay, box checked. And companies now need to be a lot more willing to sit down and listen and try to understand what the concerns are that are being expressed. And remember when I said that you're trying to negotiate the compromise. Try in your mind plan to build in elements that will address those concerns to a reasonable and cost-effective extent, instead of just saying, that's not our problem, that's a problem for your government or whatever, because that's just not the world we're living in anymore.
Thank you, Melissa. Surely somebody wants to chime in. Bradford?
Yeah, I'll contribute to that. When I first arrived in Mexico in 2003, sustainability was a far distant concept. But we were starting with basically two guys and an idea to reactivate a historic mining district. And so we really had to make the community front and center in our business plan. So we developed very quickly a motto and endeavor. First, make friends, then build a relationship, then do business. And the business that we do with the communities takes the form of effectively sitting down with the leaders of the community, whether it's the head of the ejido or the president of the municipality, and doing this on a regular basis to assess their needs and wants. And what we did, we were not going to be dangling cash. That was not something that we could do. We were a small company. We didn't have that kind of money. So we decided to form what I call private-public partnerships, where we would agree on an idea, they would provide the manpower, and we would back it with the costs. So we would support the community projects. And to this day, almost 18 years later, we're still doing annual projects like that in each of our communities. So that's what I mean by, the internal forces are paramount, first principles. In fact, I recoined the term corporate social responsibility to corporate social integrity because it comes from within. And so I just want to reiterate that if you want to do business in a community, first make friends and then build a relationship.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful, actually. Would anybody else like to follow up on that? I know it's a hard follow-up.
Yeah, sure. I will jump in. Thanks. And I agree with Melissa, ULISES, and Bradford. I agree that an open dialogue and transparency are essential in the relation with the communities. And also, it is very important to not create false expectations. So, and this is proved not only in communities, but in every human relationship. It is very important to be very honest and be clear. So yeah, I agree with them. And it's very important also to let them know that if we identify any risks if we identify any impacts, those should be communicated properly, but also we should communicate how are we going to manage those risks and impacts at that point. And also the dialogue should be open, not only from mining companies to communities, but it should be for communication between communities and companies. So it should be implemented grievance mechanisms, it should be implemented good strategies to communicate between all stakeholders.
Thank you, Yuren. Cristina?
Well, I also agree with everyone, but I believe that one of the things that we need to follow is to start by the understanding. And understanding means that they know what we do, they understand what we do, because there are a lot of paradigms that we need to break down around mining. And for example, in Cuscatlán, we have very modern mining with equipment, with high standards on safety and health. So I think we need to get to that understanding where communities can see what we are actually doing. And the other way, we need to understand their context, their needs, and their goals as individuals and as a community. And when we have this understanding, we can find those points of common interest where we can work together. For example, here in San Jose del Progreso, besides that, we have local suppliers, we have local employment. Their interest is to be part of this company and to grow from this without leaving their current agricultural or artisanal activities. But also we have agreements with the municipality to improve together things like education, health, support, infrastructure, and other items that come with them. So this is not a one-time thing, and Bradford was very clear about that. Yeah. It's something that you need to continue doing every day, all the time that you're in the community. Every day is important, this communication, and to have clear intentions with the community and the feedback from.
You know, if I could just add to that, the other thing that really matters is respecting culture. When I was working in Africa and we were doing a greenfield project, and I would go around and talk to all of the villages and, you know, just sit down in the middle of the village with as many people that were available and the chiefs. And there was one village where the chief's attitude was very rigid. I mean, even his body language was rigid. And after the meeting, I found an opportunity to just talk with him privately. And he was extremely worried that we were going to be hiring women from the village to work underground, because his only mining exposure was with the underground mines that had been there. And we weren't going to be an underground mine or surface miners. And I started by explaining that to him. But I went on to say that if your concern is that the women of your village will be in too close of a proximity to men who are not their husbands, then we can find other work for the women in your village. But we want the women in your village to be part of our project. And that he could embrace. And so we made a special program for those particular women to cultivate and sell farm products in a market on our mining concession, and everybody was happy. But if I had just walked away from that rigid attitude and said something to myself like, wow, what a prejudiced man that is, we would have had an ongoing problem. Right. So culture and making that effort to get out of my own or anybody else's culture and try to understand the other one is so vital.
Any other comments? We can wrap this one up? Okay, we're going to continue with the social. And the next question is a question I think that has been around in the mining industry for a while, if you think about the resource curse. And then the question specifically is, how can companies ensure that their social plans change the community? And how can they ensure that the community becomes self-sufficient once the company stops operating? Right? We've heard host countries, including this one, question the benefits, the long-term benefits of mining operations. And so the question really is geared towards that. How is it that we can generate wealth beyond our life of mine?
Well, I haven't gone first in a while, so I'll go first this time. I think that a lot of companies, and again, this is an area where it's an industry, we don't do a good job of telling the story. A lot of companies are working with local universities or local school systems and with NGOs in the educational and healthcare arenas in particular, and also increasingly with economic development specialists, and sitting down with communities, as Bradford was saying, to find out what are the traditional kinds of work that have been done here? How does that relate to modern economies? How can we move this kind of work experience to a modern footing? And what kind of education is necessary to enable that? And then lastly, what sort of investment? I'll give you a concrete example. I was working, again, this is in Africa, and I was working with this company, and the company established an investment fund so that the teenagers that we were sending through this training program, we were also employing as interns, and we offered them the opportunity to set aside 10% of their intern salaries in this investment fund that would be used to set up their own company at the conclusion of their education. And not only did everybody sign up for 10%, we had a lot of people come back to us and say, I'd rather put in 20%. And then we got into this whole discussion where we had to teach people about relative value of shareholders and who's going to be a majority shareholder. It was fascinating. But the upshot was we wound up with these young people setting up a transportation company that provided various services for the mine. They were able to buy 2 minibuses to help transport laborers around. With the revenue from the 2 minibuses, they bought a larger truck and started moving produce around. So does that have longevity? Yes, it does. Because in this particular example, what happened was the young people who had set up this business said, you know what, you guys won't be here forever. We want you to introduce us to the governor. And we want to go meet with the governor. And we want to talk to the governor about forming a regional cooperative. And we will be the transportation service for the regional cooperative to gather up all the agricultural products and take it to the capital and sell it there and redistribute the profits. So without dramatically changing the existing economic paradigm, because it was an agricultural zone, by working with these creative young minds, a way was found that had sustainability and longevity and changed lives. That was pretty cool.
Thank you, Melissa. Anybody else? Oh, come on, this is a good one.
I'll jump in. So every mine during its life generates employment, contracts, economic activity, tax income for the governments. But every mine has a finite life, and at the cessation of the life, all of that stops. So part of our community programs in Mexico include 2 features that last beyond the life of the mine. We invest heavily in education, both job skills training so that people locally can come to work in the mine, and when the mine stops, they can take those skills elsewhere. And scholarships, regardless of subject, so that kids in a local community, even if they have no interest in mining, can at least receive scholarships to go to higher education. And again, the idea being that education is transportable and lives long after the mine shuts down. The other main area is what we call legacy projects, where there's a specific want or need in the local communities that we can fulfill. And again, treating it as a private-public partnership in Guanaceví, when we arrived, there was no potable water supply. They used the local river, and of course, this community's upstream using it as their sewage. So that had to change. And of course, we're an underground mining company, so we actually source tremendous underground water resources. They don't belong to us, but through cooperative efforts with Conagua and the local communities, our legacy project at Guanaceví is to use the water from the mines once they're closed as a long-term source of fresh water for the community.
Thank you. Yuren?
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting question and very interesting examples from Bradford and Melissa. And I'm gonna try to wrap up quickly the idea here. So it is very, I think that this is something related to closure, the mine closure, as we are talking about what will happen after the mine life of the project's end. And we oftenly relate mine closure plans with the environmental aspects, but it is very important to consider and understand that it is not only environment, it is also socioeconomic aspects that should be considered through the planning of the closure. So also it is very important, and I think that those documents, that closure plan should be started since the conceptualization of the project, not only at the end, but just in the early stages of the project, that will allow us to understand the socioeconomic environment that we have in the area. And it's very important to understand that we should use during the operation of the mines an approach that should identify, understand, and act against the risk and impacts again. So the closure plan should be considered as a living document, because conditions in the early stages will not be the same at the end, but rather the social and environment will be different at the end of the life of mine. So we believe that the best way to ensure that a successful economy will stay at the end of the life of mine, it will be it is not a magical formula. It should be developed over the years that the mine site operates, and it is very important to stay how would I say receptive of the changes over the years of the socioeconomic aspects. So this approach, we oftenly use this approach of the socioeconomic closure plan with our clients. Moreover, I think that the added value of doing this approach is providing better planning, but also it has a very good impacts on the capital expenditures of the project at the end of the mine life.
Thank you, Yuren. Cristina?
Well, there's a word in the question that is very impacting, that is change. No, so why I feel this, because here in Oaxaca we are in a place with uses and customs, and this means that sometimes big groups fear a lot to change. They like the way they live, they like their customs, they don't want to change. So it's just like the first step is to understand how they are living, what they like about their living, what they would like to improve about their living, and then to open this window about what else could they do. For example, when the mine arrived to San Jose del Progreso, there was a lot of migration related to the lack of job opportunities in the area. So women were left alone in Oaxaca, in this area, and men went to the United States or another country. When job opportunities arise in the area, men stayed. The son, they stayed. And then the women, they saw they also have an opportunity to do something else, but housekeeping or just the artisanal activities they did because it was what they had. But now they have choices. And that is a change. And it's an important change. One day a woman came to me and she said, well, I didn't finish elementary school. So what I do is to buy and sell vegetables. But now I want to tell you that my daughter, she's in the university and she's doing something that I could never imagine of myself doing. And I want these opportunities to continue for her. And that makes you feel that they do want this change, that they do see what good this brings to them, because it's their choice. And I think that's a very important thing when we are here. And it's the base for us to know what is going to happen when we leave and how to be prepared together with the communities to know where to go. Like you all said, this is the related to the closure plan, and it's alive because they change what they want and where they want to go. But we need to start doing plans, long-term plans, and together to make sure that they are not left alone when the mine leaves.
Thank you, Cristina. And as expected, it's now 5 p.m. But we're not finished yet. I believe we have a breakout room, and I'm going to ask perhaps Maida if she could share that with us so that we can go to that breakout room and continue this conversation.